Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about a lesson plan for teaching brainstorming. Now, this is a general brainstorming lesson plan, just to teach some basic strategies, but you could definitely adapt this for specific lessons or specific projects, things like this. So I had my students read a little bit about several different brainstorming techniques. I had them watch a video about brainstorming. And then when we got to class, so I did this somewhat focused on university-related issues because of the particular project that we're going to be going into, but you could choose any topic that's going to be relevant for a project you're doing. So the first brainstorming activity I had them practice had 4 steps. We started just specifically with step number 1, where I had them write down 3 issues or topics related to university that they could write some kind of essay about. So I told them these could be any 3 things. These can be very, very broad, like national issues or Penn State University level issues, or these can be very narrow. These can be things that affect you personally or affect your friend group or the wing of your dorm, whatever it is. But just any sort of issues or concerns, problems, anything like that. You're just writing down 3 topics. So I gave them some time to do that. And then afterwards we talked, I explained them that there's a couple of different variations of this, that this step 1 of this 4-step process I was having them do is actually a brainstorming activity in itself. You can either do this listing activity, sometimes called inventorying, and I think some people use other names and things like that. So that's one option where you just sort of say, all right, I'm going to come up with 3 or 5 or 10 or whatever it is, topics. However many topics you want to list out, and then you just fill that list. That's one approach. Another approach is where you time yourself. Basically, you say, okay, I'm going to give myself 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is, and I'm going to just write down every idea that comes into my head. I'm going to turn off my critical brain, so I'm not thinking about, is this a good idea or not? Would this be a good topic? Just, if it's in there, it goes down on the page. And you just spend the entire 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is, writing down as many ideas as you can think of. So these are both really good ways, I explained to them, of generating a lot of potential ideas. But sometimes, I said, it benefits you to get another set of eyes, another brain thinking about this potential topic. So I had them switch papers with a partner, or switch laptops. Most of them typed this. But you switched with a partner. You gave them your list of 3, and you got their list of 3, and then you wrote 2 responses to each of the 3 topics. And they wrote 2 responses for each of your 3 topics. So in this case, 6 responses altogether. These could be questions you had. These could be potential solutions to the problem. These could be personal connections. These could be ideas. These could be anything. Whatever 2 responses you have to that topic. That was the brief. And then after that, the 4th step, once they had finished writing down their 6 responses, was they would discuss with their partner. And specifically, I said one thing you should be discussing, is which of these topics has the most meat on the bone for a potential essay. So if you were writing a paper about one of these topics, which one would be the best option? So I gave them some time to discuss, and then we moved to our second activity. We wrapped up our first activity and moved to our second. And the wrap up for that first activity was basically sort of, I had a few people share one of the topics that they had come up with and their partner's 2 responses. And we talked about how having somebody else's feedback, somebody else's responses can push you to think beyond what you were initially thinking of, because they may have different perspectives. They may have different knowledge. They may have a different take on this topic than you do. So that can give you more insight for greater depth and complexity with how you're treating this subject. Then we moved to the second project, and the transition here was that while getting somebody else's responses can be really beneficial, it's that first activity still requires you to come up with topics on your own. But sometimes you can't really. Nothing is coming. So I had them look at the local state college area newspaper's website, or the Penn State student newspaper website, or InsideHigherEd.com, which is a higher education, universities, and colleges trade publication that's easy and accessible to read for the most part. And basically what I had them do was just sort of look through whatever articles grabbed their eye from one or more of those sites and try and come up with at least 2 things that were sort of sparked for them. So based on what you saw in these articles, what might you be interested in writing about? This was basically the brief. So I gave them a decent amount of time to read or at least skim some of the articles and start letting these things percolate for them, letting these things sort of see what was of interest. And so I gave them some time to do that, and then I asked a few people to tell us about one of the articles that they read and what was interesting about it for them. What would they want to engage with, or what did it make them think about? So again, we're one of the recurring themes in this lesson plan is you have students share the work that they are doing so that you can get these sort of models for how to think about brainstorming and how to use these techniques productively. And so then we shifted to the third and final activity I taught, which was mind mapping or webbing or clustering, or about half a dozen other names that people typically use for this. And I showed them 2 techniques for this. The first is the sort of traditional freehand version, where on a piece of paper you write your topic, put a circle around it, and then do lines out to sub-branches and things like this. And we started with university, and then I said, all right, what's a sub-topic that we could put as a branch of university? And I wrote down whatever the first one was that somebody volunteered, and then I came up with 2 to 3 additional sub-branches, and I connected one of those sub-branches back to university, because I said, all right, this one we could talk about a sort of direct connection between university and this sub-branch. So again, I think most students at this point, in university at least, in like high school, middle school, this may not be as much the case, but generally students know how to do clustering or mind mapping. So I didn't necessarily feel that I needed to spend a massive amount of time on this. But the other variation I did was I showed them Bubbless, bubbl.us. And I'm going to do a separate video about that, because I think that's a service worth knowing about. But basically, it's a digital mind mapping space where you can create an electronic mind map, draw connections, move things around. Same thing as doing it on paper, just you're doing it electronically. And so I told them how to actually use that service, because I think yes, students can do these things by hand, but most students nowadays are more comfortable working digitally. And so I think that was a useful thing to show them. And I gave them And I recreated on Bubblist that initial mind map that we had started with. I put university there. I created a new branch for whatever topic it was, created the sub branches, etc., etc. Then I gave them a few minutes to start building their own mind map from the word university, coming up with the threads that they thought would be useful. And after I had given them a little bit of time to do that, I said, all right, let's add 2 more branches to our mind map. And I just did this on Bubblist, but you could do this on the chalkboard, dry erase board, whatever it is you're working with. And I had 2 students tell me what their main branch was and what sub-branches they had written out. And so we just got a larger mind map that connected us better to these ideas. It really showed us how these things work. So I think that was a really useful thing. And then we talked a little bit to sort of wrap things up about why mind mapping is useful, how it's beneficial to sort of push yourself to think beyond the most immediate ideas by thinking about, okay, what else is there? What can I connect this to? And how might these things be linked? Maybe I want to talk in my essay about how this point and this point are actually connected. And so, again, it's one of the things that I think is really worth doing with this lesson plan is, again, giving them that framework of here's how this tool works, and then having them sort of demonstrate what they've done with that tool. I think that's a good way of promoting engagement with the material, but also of sort of modeling for students who maybe aren't feeling as comfortable with this particular brainstorming strategy, what their peers have come up with. I think that can be a really useful tool.